Hello, and welcome to I Am Not For Everyone, the podcast for those looking to release shame, heal from trauma, and feel really, really good being their fully expressed, authentic selves. My name's Dr. Lee, and I am a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner and a certified clinical trauma professional, as well as a mom, wife, and a human being navigating the world with complex PTSD. Season 1 of this podcast came about because I was tired of spending decades living in a shame-filled, trauma-laden body and brain. And after doing a lot of work and learning how to return to a safe, grounded place in my life, I knew it was time for me to take my experience in education and use my voice to unsilence myself, to release the leftover shame, and to give others permission to do the same. On Season 2 of this podcast, I'm going to be sharing my experience in education. But even more importantly, I'm going to be bringing on some incredible guests who are going to unsilence themselves. They're going to share their own stories of trauma, shame, and their journeys to healing, resiliency, and self-acceptance. While I believe these episodes will be deeply impactful, I do want to add a disclaimer that we're going to be talking about some potentially triggering topics. So please take the invitation to pause or skip or fast forward on any episode, and to treat yourself gracefully and kindly after each time that you listen. Let's dive in. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of I Am Not For Everyone. I am really just feeling honored and excited today to have the guest here that I have. I have the lovely Jennifer, and she is one of my clients and one of my favorite humans on the planet. You're going to listen to her and just hear her energy and her beautiful soul through what she's saying, and you're going to fall in love with her too, like I feel about her. And after that big pump up, Jennifer, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, so my name is Jennifer Semsch. I am a lot of things. I have many identities. When it comes to this, though, I am a recovering cult member. And I always say recovering. I never stop recovering. And I like to call myself a joy promoter.
You are that for sure.
I do a lot of other things in my life, but joy promoter is my number one. So
I love that. Okay. Well, there was a nice little spoiler there of what we're going to be talking about today, which is, your story of what you experienced in the cult that you were in. So please, let's dive in. Tell us your story.
Oh man. Okay. So I was born into a relatively, what I thought was a normal family. My parents are both veterans. They were both registered nurses. And, I remember the first probably 6 years of my life being pretty normal, pretty regular. If we were weird, I didn't know it. And then when I was 6 years old, my parents were like, oh, hey, guess what? We're selling everything. We're moving and we're joining a cult. And of course, at the age of 6, I didn't know it was a cult. All I knew is that my whole life got completely ripped out from under me. I can remember going to school because the cult has their own school. So we didn't even get to go to public school. So we were fully immersed in this cult. And I remember going to school the first day and not even knowing if I was allowed to speak. And just sitting there and being like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. And that was really the first time I remember feeling shame, and it never stopped. From that day forward, I knew that I was supposed to be ashamed of who I was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a lot. Yeah. And obviously, I know you said hey, kids, we're joining a cult like that. I'm guessing that's not exactly how they said it, right?
That is not the words that were used. And to this day, they remain members of that religious sect and would vehemently deny that they are a part of a cult.
Okay, so I was actually, and I meant to do this before the episode, so I was fast typing, Googling the definition of a cult, and it according to the Google, right, can be broadly defined as a formal religious veneration or a system of religious beliefs and body of adherence where there is great devotion to a person or idea, as well as to an artistic or intellectual movement or figure. And it sounds like cultic worship is social, which means more than just group worshiping the same deity in the same place at the same time. It's structured with a division of sacred personnel. So there's special people who lead and perform the cultic ceremonies for the people who have to obey.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Oh, yeah. You do not make the leadership mad.
Mm. And
it really is. I know I shared this story with you earlier this week, but I was reminded of how deep it runs. And we'll get into this a little bit more. But my mom, who has acknowledged a lot of what happened to me, like to me, she has acknowledged it. But she was interviewed for a biography that one of the schoolgirls in that religious sect had to do. She had to write a biography. So she interviewed my mother. And when my sister and I got to read the biography, there's this whole paragraph about how gut-wrenching it was that we left the cult and absolutely zero mention of any of the things that happened that made us leave.
Sure, because probably from her perspective, even if she has feelings on those things, it's not safe for her to talk about it. It's shameful for her to talk about it.
Yeah. So I told my sister, because we had like this little rant when we first saw it. I was like, are you kidding me? And then I was like, hey, we have to be gracious with her because she has so much unresolved trauma. And B, she's surviving.
Yeah.
Because she's still in it.
That's a very loving and compassionate and empathetic perspective to take. And I'm guessing that has taken a lot of development. So like, let's go back to what you were talking about just a few minutes ago of like, that's the first time you remember feeling shame and it didn't stop. So like, tell us more.
So, So, when you join this cult, it is an immersion. You no longer really interact at any level with the outside world. So you go to the same church, you go to the same school, you have the same friends. They are fully immersed in your life. They know everything that you do. And if they don't know, they are not afraid to ask, and you are expected to tell them.
No privacy.
None. And it is a culture within a culture. If you think of our American culture and our society, they are a completely different subculture. And if you weren't born into the cult and raised in the cult, you don't know all the little things about the cult. And you're made fun of, you're bullied. They speak an entirely different language.
Really?
So they can be talking about you right in front of you. Now, granted, I didn't take long to figure out when that was happening.
Sure.
And that added to the shame when you're standing there and people start speaking a different language just so you don't know what they're saying.
Yeah.
There's so much that I just didn't know. And I didn't know that these other kids that I was hanging out with didn't know who Pee Wee Herman was. And they didn't know who Alvin and the Chipmunks were. And I would say things and talk about things that I knew because I was raised in normal society for the first 6 years of my life. And they would go home and tell their parents, and then they would be like, well, she's a really bad girl because she knows all these things that she's not supposed to know.
Ooh, so you're being shamed around things that are completely outside of your control. And I'm sure that I'm wondering, I guess I should say, I'm not sure. I feel like that would do two things, right? One, that would, just let's be honest, make you feel probably pretty crappy, right? Like feel pretty shitty about who you are and what you know. And also like, and not want to be part of that group, but at the same time, also create a longing to like change and mold and fit in more so that you are part of that group. So then it's like creating two very different, almost rivalry desires, right?
Yes. So there's this this massive identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Because on one side, you're ashamed of who you are, and you've learned very quickly that you are not one of the people, that you have no choice but to coexist with.
Mm-hmm.
You're not one of them. And then there's this desperation to become one of them, and for them to accept you, and a desperation to never become one of them.
This feels like the Mean Girls in high school, but like at level 1000.
Yeah, because, when you're dealing with mean girls in high school, you can go home and tell your mom.
Yeah.
You get time away from those mean girls.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
You can find someone safe to tell. There was no one safe.
There was no one safe. Yeah. So like, what did your relationship look like with your parents at this point? First of all, did they ever tell you, have they ever shared with you why they made this decision? Or, was that something that you knew at the time or you learned later?
I mean, I was 6. I didn't really understand what was going on.
Yeah.
I've heard them talk many times to other people over the years, and they just felt that it was a religion that aligned with their beliefs. Mm-hmm. And I know my parents very well, and their core beliefs that are presented, the advertised religion, yeah, totally goes along with their beliefs. The truth about the religion is a whole nother story. Mm. And as a kid, I was 6. I wanted nothing more than for my parents to be happy.
Sure.
And I felt so much responsibility to make it work for them. Why? I don't know, other than I just love my parents and I wanted things to go well for them. And we didn't tell them a lot of things that happened. And I think they were trying to blend into this new society. They were so focused on blending into the new society that sometimes the things that were happening to us just kind of didn't get noticed. And maybe our behavior is acting out, because full disclosure, I was a little heathen because I was so desperate for someone to notice me, to understand me, and to just accept me for who I was, because it was nowhere. There was nowhere that I was accepted for exactly who I was.
Yeah. So there is a emerging research really looking at trauma responses, our responses to threat, right? And one of the newer ones that has been talked about over the last decade or two is the fawn response, right? Which is the people-pleasing response. And what we're actually finding is that within fawn, there's really 3 separate responses. And one of them is the attach cry for help. And you just so beautifully described that, of I'm going to act out. I'm going to do something that gets your attention, that gets you attached to me. Like, I'm crying out for help. I'm basically saying, like, please come save me.
Yeah.
And the way in which we ask for someone to save us, to get us out of this situation, oftentimes looks very weird. It can look rebellious. It can look desperate. It can look clingy. It can look like all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And it is often misunderstood by the person on the receiving end of the cry.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was misunderstood, obviously, by my parents. And it only solidified the shame that I experienced, because it only solidified the belief that I was a bad kid, a bad girl, and that I would lead all these other people's children astray.
So, and obviously, we have a working relationship. You know that I never want you to speak about anything that doesn't actually feel safe or good in your system. And, I also know that this is something that you really wanted to do, to be able to own what happened to you. And this is a step that you're taking to help release and heal from this shameful experience. So, like, is there anything that you haven't said before, anything that you haven't shared before that, or something that maybe you have shared before and you want to share in this platform, of like what you went through, what you did experience?
Oh man. Well, there's a lot, and it gets really intricate. What I want you to remember, like, the first thing I want to say is, when I share, is if I'm going to hold my parents responsible for anything bad, I have to acknowledge the good.
Yeah, exactly.
And I cannot say enough good things about them. And I get emotional because I really care about my parents. And I have been threatened if I speak, that if I speak, there could be negative consequences for myself, for my parents. And I don't want anything bad to happen to them.
Of course not.
And I can't keep quiet anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to acknowledge that my parents are responsible for far more good than they have ever been responsible for bad. And I hold them, I've forgiven them for the role they played because I look at it from a place of understanding. I can see where they were. I can see what they were trying to do, whether it was effective or not. Their hearts were pure. And to this day, I believe that they are truly, they believe they did the right thing. So the shame started that first day. I had a teacher. So all the teachers, they're not like licensed educators.
Yeah.
They are young girls of the cult. And they have completed the same education that they're giving us. That's it.
Wow.
So they're not licensed. They've been to no special schooling. They just know what they know. And so my teacher was the daughter of a leader, the leader. So their leadership is, there's like the highest, and then there's several that work underneath him. So she was the daughter of the highest leader. And I was extremely intelligent. And I would point out flaws in her teaching. Like, that's not how you pronounce that word. That's not how it's said. That's not actually how that works. And pair that with the fact that I was the heathen child, or a heathen child. I was not her favorite.
Sure.
Because this is not a public school. Spanking was allowed. And if you got spanked at school, it was like the ultimate shame. And I lost count, but I think I was spanked no less than 7 times. And not like lightly. It's more of a beating. So if you're spanked, then clearly that's an extra level of shame that's applied. So it felt like I always had this, there was the basic shame, and then there was the teacher piling on shame. And as I got older, it just got worse and worse. And then there came this point where I became a young woman and I started to develop. And that's when I learned that the men of this cult do whatever they want with young women who are believed to be less than or just shameful. So if you're already in a place of shame, if you've already been deemed less than their elite, then you are freely available. And again, there's no safe place to go. You can't tell anyone. And they've already got you ashamed. So then they just say, well, if you tell anyone, it'll be that much worse. And they employ their children to create social exclusion, to make sure that you are reputed to be nothing other than problematic, a liar, not to be trusted. That way, if you do speak, your words are of no effect because you're not trustworthy. You've already proven yourself to be someone that can't be trusted and a bad kid. It is very intricately done, and there's no escape.
That's a lot.
It is.
You know, when you first started speaking, you said something that a lot of my clients and a lot of my guests say, which is, the qualification of like really the both and
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, as hard or as horrible as this experience was, and as involved as my family was, or whomever they're talking about, there's a, you know, they've also done good. And I think that I just want to tease that out here because, you know, you've had these horrible things happen to you. There's no other word for it. Yeah, these awful things happen. And yet you can still experience love, and you can still have desires to be connected to the people that put you in the situation where these horrible things happened. And this is why shame works so well, right?
Yes.
This is why the weaponization of shame is so freaking effective. Is because you're 6 or you're 10 or you're 12 and you love your parents and you're connected to your family and you want to do a good job for them and you want to make them happy and you want to, you know, be in a family unit where you're accepted and loved and all of those things. And also your brain and your animal body is going, there's something wrong here. There's something not right here. This can't be what I'm supposed to go through. This doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel okay. And that those two experiences get like woven together and it gets really messy.
Yeah, it does.
And so, yeah. And so then you're feeling like, oh my gosh, like part of me wants to just, you know, rage and scream and call all of these people onto the carpet and say all the things. And then there's another piece of me that like wants to protect and wants to love and wants to be compassionate, wants to be empathetic. And it can be really hard to like, you can rapid cycle through that also very quickly.
Absolutely. There are times when something is said in conversations where I just want to be like, no, you are so wrong. And I don't, because I know that there will never be the acknowledgement that I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. Because I want nothing more. I mean, if I had what I wanted, I would be validated all the way. My parents would acknowledge to me, they would acknowledge to the members of the cult, they would call them out, they would call them to accountability. And I know that's not going to happen. In fact, I'm not even sure. My parents did not know a lot of what was going on at the time.
Sure.
I want to make that really clear. They were not knowingly letting this take place. I have never told them the full extent. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I ever will.
Well, and let's just talk about how like good. I say good, not from that they don't deserve to know or whatever. I say good from the perspective of like, you're taking your power back and deciding what you say and what you don't.
Yeah. And they know enough that they could validate me. Mm-hmm. They could stand up to the people involved. And they're still in it and they're still traumatized. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they would know how if they wanted to.
Yeah. You are, I mean, this is a pattern that didn't start long ago for your family in particular. And what I love is that you are breaking, you are making it impossible for a pattern to continue that tried to start with you.
Yeah. And that was that was a huge reason that I wanted to start talking, is when this, there have been several incidents over the past several years that has brought some of this issue to light into the public eye. And it's still widely believed that this isn't a thing.
In this group.
And if I don't say something, if I don't do my part to break this cycle, then everything that happened to me was for nothing. Mm. If I don't take what happened to me, I can sit and I can be mad about what happened to me, and I can wallow in the self-pity and live in that trauma and replay it over and over in my head if I want to. Or I can stand up and say, if it happens again, it won't be because I didn't say something.
Mm. So at what point, as you're going through all this, because I mean, it sounds like the entire time your body was screaming, like, this isn't right. Like, we know, like, there's alarm bells going off the entire time.
Yes.
And at what point did you decide, like, I'm not willing to stay here anymore? Like, I'm not willing to be a part of this anymore.
I was 18 and a half. So I'd been in the cult for about 12 and a half years. And basically I pushed and pushed and pushed. And I found the level of acting out that would kind of bring things to a head. And then I had one friend outside of the cult that I could call and who could assist me. And she literally came and got me from my parents' house at like 10 o'clock at night. And I had all of my belongings in a pillowcase.
Mm.
And she took me to her mom's house and gave me a safe place to stay. And she's still one of my dearest friends. I mean, she'll tell you, she's like, I was terrified for days afterwards that they were going to roll up in one of their big vans and come for me and make you go back to them. And I was like, yeah, me too. Wow. And thank you.
What a friend.
Yeah.
What made it finally feel, I don't want to say safe. What made it finally feel more dangerous to stay than?
So
leave?
The more I acted out, the more oppressed I became. So the more you act out in this cult, the more excluded you become.
Okay.
And I had fawned to the point of agreeing to become a member of the cult and letting them make me a member. And then I acted out to the point that they decided that I needed to be disciplined. And their form of discipline is pretty extreme as far as the exclusion. So you're not allowed to eat with anyone. People don't have to speak with you. And they really kind of take away anything that looked like a social life is taken from you.
Mm. Is your family allowed to interact with you?
I mean, you live with them.
Yeah.
They are not allowed to eat at the same table as you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot. Okay. So then how did we find this magical friend?
So the young women are not necessarily supposed to have jobs. However, I had a neighbor whose wife had Alzheimer's, and he needed someone to sit with her a few days a week. So my parents decided that would be okay. And so this friend was their granddaughter.
Got it.
Yeah.
What a universal gift.
Yes. Yes. And it when I look back, I always think life happens for you. Is it Tony Robbins? Tony Robbins says life happens for you, not to you.
Yeah.
And I look back over even that time when I was in the deepest, darkest, horrific times, there were things happening for me. Even then.
Plus, I have to imagine if you had that job and you were working outside of the community, there's probably some moments of like, oh, we really aren't doing things in a normal, like,
oh yeah,
like this is not right.
Yeah. And over the years, my parents would still talk to their friends who were not members of the cult. So I would get to interact with like certain people for brief times. There was never, we couldn't be too buddy, but my parents would see their friends and then I would see their friends as kids. And I would be like, weird, there's something wrong. This can't be the way it's supposed to be.
Which makes sense that there is the desire to keep you as inclusive of a community as possible, because if you're able to see examples of the outside world, you're like, again, the alarm bells probably start ringing louder and louder.
Yes.
Did your parents get any Was there any blowback from the community that they were still communicating with outside?
I felt like our family was always treated differently and always there were certain people. I remember my dad saying there were certain people who wouldn't speak to him
In the community
for whatever reason, probably because I and several of my siblings were not, didn't fit the cookie cutter.
That's right.
And we were just different because we hadn't been raised in their society. So we hadn't learned we knew a different life. We knew something different.
Ooh, you were so dangerous. Y'all were so dangerous.
Yes. Yes. And who was I talking to? And I was like, this is the most terrifying thing for me to start talking.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I remember you saying too that how many siblings do you have?
I have 5 brothers and a sister.
Okay. And how many of them left?
2 of my brothers left. So my oldest brother left right around the same time I did, which was 22 years ago this month.
Well bragged.
Say what?
I said, well bragged.
Right. 22 years ago this month. And then my youngest brother left 14 years ago. And my sister just left 4 years ago.
Wow.
I have one brother who is fully bought in, like fully bought in. He's married to a high religious leader's daughter, and he drank the Kool-Aid. And then I have 2 brothers who are special needs that my parents adopted, and they clearly are still there because they're dependent upon my parents.
Gotcha. Wow. So there's a lot of this is a complicated story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the 2 brothers and sister that left, do you all communicate often, or do you still communicate with your brother who's in?
So I still talk to all of my siblings. My sister and I are probably the closest. She's 10 years younger than me, and we're very, very close. I'm not super close with any of my brothers. I think because we just all deal with our traumas in different ways.
Sure.
And so I'm not super close with them. However, I don't not talk to them. Gotcha. We're just not close. And my brother that's in I really struggle with him a lot. I don't really desire his approval. He was and always has been very, very close to the people who hurt me, and will stand up for them and justify them, because he knows a lot of things, and he won't admit, validate.
I can only imagine how that feels.
Yeah. And their solution, I mean, if we bring it up, anytime it's been brought up, the solution is, well, you just have to forgive.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I'm like, yes, I do need to forgive. And I do not need to stay in that environment. It is 100% allowed for me to live and exist in an environment where I am safe.
Amen. Period.
Yeah. End of story.
End of sentence. Yeah.
End of story.
So, okay. So 22 years ago this month, what did you do once you were out of that space to, what steps did you take to start releasing from this and healing from this?
Man, okay. I'm going to be really honest. I went hog wild. I had no idea what to do. I had no comprehension of how to exist in the real world. And when I tell people, I'm like, you have to understand, I switched cultures twice. I existed in regular society until I was 6. And then I had to switch to the cult society. By the time I had turned 18, first of all, a lot had changed in 12 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And secondly, I was experiencing society as an adult, not as a 6-year-old child. So I, by the grace of God, I'm still alive. I did. I kind of went crazy for a while, just looking for a place where I belonged. I had nowhere that I belonged.
Mm-hmm.
It was really trauma on top of trauma because I was leaving a place where if I wasn't safe, at least I was familiar.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And going into a place where I wasn't really sure that I was safe or familiar and trying to navigate, but I knew whatever unsafety I was experiencing out there, I had a whole lot more control over it than I did the experiences I was having in the cult. So I kind of went crazy for a while. Um, got married to a man who was emotionally abusive and sometimes physically abusive. I really I didn't heal. I tried, I was looking, I was searching, and it took a lot of years to finally realize that I was just bottling everything up and trying to find acceptance somewhere.
Mm.
And then I can't tell you the day that I started taking steps towards healing. I would have to give a lot of credit, honestly, to my husband.
Mm.
He took me. I was a hot mess when I met that boy. Hot mess. And I treated him, I was so mean to him.
Of course you
And
were.
oh yeah. I was like, I don't need another person in my life. And he was so nice to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was infuriating. I remember
It
the
was.
first time to the movies, I had my hand clenched in a fist because I was afraid he was going to try to hold it and I was going to punch him in the nose. That was the kind of dates this poor man took me on.
Yeah.
And he just kept showing up with patient persistence and this perception of what I needed that even I couldn't I couldn't have identified it. I couldn't have expressed it. And he has let me find healing and stood by me the whole way. He hasn't forced it on me at any point,
Mm-hmm.
but he's always just supported me when I'm like, hey, I got this thing that I got to work through. He's like, cool, whatever you need to do.
Ooh. Okay. So first of all, I am resonating so deeply with this story. I've shared on a previous podcast. My trauma is very different than yours. And I've shared that I punched my husband in the face early in our relationship because he grabbed me in a weird way. Not violently, just,
Right.
joking around. I want to tease out what you're saying here because I think that this is really, there's two main points. The first is that so many people give women who are in emotionally, physically, sexually abusive situations who then get out and repeat their patterns, they give them such a hard time. There's so much shame wrapped up in that of like how you finally got out of this after 12 and a half years and you keep putting yourself back in the same situation. Why?
Yeah.
Why? And I really want to have a compassionate, empathetic conversation about this because the reason is because that is what you know, and that is what your body and your brain and the programming that you have received knows and recognizes and understands. And so, and it comes to the second point of there is a piece of this where the validation, like you're saying, the desire for validation, the desire for healing, the desire for acceptance, the desire for love and connection you've been taught to place it externally outside of yourself.
Yes.
And so, and this is another thing that shame does. How can I get this other person to accept me, to love me, to want me, to be okay with me? And you start focusing on that so much that you forget that you're supposed to like and know and love and trust yourself. Right. And so you keep going out, seeking that external validation and those external ways of fulfilling yourself. And they never work because it's it has to be internal first and then the external, right? I always say, like, you can't get validation on something that you don't believe.
Yeah.
And so me seeking quote unquote validation, if I don't believe that I'm worthy of love and I'm seeking validation outside of me from love, it doesn't matter how much you tell me you love me. I'm not going to believe you until I believe that I'm worthy of that love, until I love myself. Right. So I love that we both had men come into our lives.
Yeah.
That were like, I'm going to hold the space for you while you learn how to validate yourself, while you learn how to love yourself, while you learn how to heal yourself. And I'm also not going to let you pull the crap that you pulled in all of these other relationships, that you pulled in all these other places from a space of trauma. Like, you know, I'm going to hold you responsible, and I'm also going to hold space for you, like, and give you just a ton of grace and a ton of acceptance and a ton of space to like figure your stuff out.
Yes. Early in our relationship, once I got past the hating stage of things and we started to decide that maybe I might kind of like him, I will never forget the first time. There was two things that happened that I was like, whoa. The first thing that ever threw me off was we had started, I mean, it kind of became clear that we were exclusive, and it was like a gradual progression because I was pretty broken at the time. And one of my friends was like, "Hey, do you want to go out after work tonight?" And I was like, "Well, let me talk to him. Let me talk to my husband, my at the time boyfriend, and make sure he's okay with it." And he was like, "Go do what you want." And I was like, "Okay." So I did. And the next morning he goes, "Did you have a good time last night?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Cool." And I was like, "You don't need to know who was there and what I did and who I talked to and how many drinks I had and whether or not I danced with anyone and who talked to me." And he was like, "No, I don't care. Did you have fun?"
Mm.
And it threw me for a loop. And for a little bit, I was like, well, he doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't care.
Yeah.
And then I had this moment where I was like, I think this is how it's supposed to be.
You're describing the weirdness, right? I actually have other clients have said this, who like, they're like, the person I'm with now, the one that feels safe and who like created that space and like loves me in like a non-traumatic way, in a safe, supportive, non-shameful way. They're like, I wasn't initially attracted. Like I wasn't, like you just said, I wasn't sure if I even liked them because there wasn't any of that trauma bonding there. There wasn't any of the attached cry for help. There wasn't any of like, this guy's going to save me. This guy's going to fulfill all my needs. This guy's going to be everything and more. Like, this is going to be the relationship that takes me out of, there's none of that. And so it can feel like there's no butterflies in your stomach or like zings down to like, you know, juicy places in our body. Like sometimes it does happen, but even when it does, it's not the same level of activation. Right. I always tell people, when you are dating someone, if you feel triggered, but in a good way, like we want to look at that and make sure that this isn't trauma bonding.
Yeah. I hated him. He was not my type. And for perspective,
I love this so much.
I was living in a mission house with a Baptist missionary family who I'm very close to this day. I adore them. They are beautiful humans. They are my family as much as my biological family. And I remember them laughing at me when I would go out with him, because the main reason I would go places with him is because he would pay for my food and I could get out of that house. It was really, I was using him. And we laugh about it now because I'm like, man, you were a sucker. And he's like, you were clearly broken and it was fine. And I remember talking about how he was old and he wasn't my type and all of these things, all of the reasons that he wasn't going to be the one, that I was just going to use him. And I can look back and go, the reason he wasn't my type is because he wasn't an abuser.
Yeah. Wow.
He wasn't in it for him.
Yeah. And in fact, it's like, that can feel so distrusting when there's somebody who's like, no, I just want you to be happy. Like, no, I actually just really care about you. And I love that so much, that your newfound family is watching this go down. Like she has no idea what's happening right now.
Exactly. And the second thing that was so weird about him is I had developed this behavior in any relationship where I would be like, well, do you like it when I look this way? Do you like it when I look that way? Do you like it when I act this way? And he would be like, just be you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be like, but I need to know who you want me to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I
didn't know who you were, right? Like,
because,
who am I?
Yeah, because I need to be who you want me to be because I'm not sure what version of me is safe. And his permission to be unapologetically myself can I tell a quick story? This is just the cutest story. So probably about a year into our relationship, I was having this meltdown where life was just a lot. And I was involved in a custody battle with my kids. And I was still very broken and still on the road to healing. And I had this moment and I remember laying in bed next to him and like kind of whimpering and whining and being like, I just want to be 5 years old again, wearing my Cheerios t-shirt because that's the last time I can remember being happy and everything was fine. And he was like, your Cheerios t-shirt? And I was like, yeah, it was yellow and it said Cheerios on it. And it had a Cheerio was the dot on the I. And it was my favorite shirt. And he was like, okay, cool. That was the end of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And about 4 days later, a package showed up in the mail. And it was a grown-up size Cheerios t-shirt. And to this day, I have it. And when I wear it, I can do whatever I want.
Oh my gosh. Well, now you have me crying. My eyes are leaking. Oh my gosh. Oh, that is so sweet.
He's a keeper. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So your life now, obviously much, much different, much, much better. How long have you two been together?
So, well, it's kind of a fluid concept. We met in November of 2009. Mm-hmm. So it'll be 12 years next month. And we've known each other for 12 years. We've been together probably 11 and a half of those that I would say we were mutually attracted to one another. And my life now it's beautiful. Mm. I am working through, I've been on the road to healing for 12 years. And earlier this year, I was like, dude, there's some stuff that I've got to work through and I can't work through it by myself because I just want to put this in perspective. I've never had therapy for anything that happened to me. Mm-hmm. And I knew there were things that I had to talk through with someone who didn't go through them with me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where you came into play. Mm-hmm. And it's been so beautiful because as I've worked through traumas, it's really opened up some beautiful conversations between me and my husband about things that happened to me and why I had some of the beliefs about myself and about our relationship that weren't true. Yeah. They were the traumatized version of my beliefs. Yeah. And it's really created some beautiful places for him to just step up and really support me as I heal and grow through the things that happened to me. And it's really created this deep desire within me to become a voice and an advocate for other women who are in similar situations. Yeah. I was so pushed down and so diminished and had such little belief in myself for so many years. And it's a passion within me to help other women see that they are more than capable of moving past the things that have happened to them and living fulfilling lives.
Yeah. Well, two things. I'm going to share that when I met you, I was like, oh, this woman's a coach. She's going to be a coach. She's going to be a public speaker. Like, that's just what she's going to do. I was like, I'm not going to tell her that right now because she's going to not believe me, and that's fine. But from the moment I met you, I was like, oh, that's what's going to happen. So this actually feels like a very full circle moment for me to have you on here starting to share your story. Because I'm like, it's starting.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
And the other thing I want to do is coach you for a second. And anyone else out there who's listening, because I want to just reframe something I've heard you say a couple of times, this idea that you were broken. And, I think that we use that language a lot of like I'm broken, I need fixed. Like you had a lot of really painful, really hard, really traumatic things happen to you.
Yeah.
That may have made you feel broken, right? The feeling may have been, I'm not whole. The feeling may have been, I'm not broken. But this is what I want you and everyone to hear, is that this is the trick that shame plays on you.
Ooh.
This is a trick that this is the devilish trick. If I can convince you that you're broken, then you're going to spend all of this time focusing on that and how to be fixed. If you can see that you're not actually broken and you've just gone through some things and you've learned some things that aren't serving you, and the focus is simply on like remembering that you're whole instead, that's a heck of a lot easier of a journey to take.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So instead of saying you were broken, you just forgot that you were whole.
Yeah. And I felt like I was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And was looking for the medicine, for the cure. I was looking for the cure. There isn't a cure. There's only healing.
Exactly. There's not a cure. It's just remembering who you were the moment that you burst out onto this planet as the beautiful human that you were, whole and everything you needed to be. That's it. Okay. So what is one piece of advice that you would like to give our listeners who have maybe gone through a similar situation or who see themselves in your story to where you were before? What would you want to say to them?
Man, first of all, you're not alone. You're not. It can feel like such a lonely, isolated place. And you're not alone. And secondly, I will talk to you if you ever need someone to just say, I get it.
Okay.
You can always reach out to me. I think my social information will be in the chat notes or the show notes.
Oh yeah. We're going to put your social media and like email, however you desire for people to get a hold of you. We'll put that in the chat. And please, like, y'all, sometimes I think you hear my guests or you hear me say, reach out, email us, talk to us. Like that's not just a thing we're adding on the end. We love it when you do that.
Yes. Yes.
Please do.
My heart for women who are hurting, and it's not exclusive. Like you don't have to come from a cult to reach out to me. If you're in a place where you just aren't sure who you are because of what's happened to you, if you just need somebody to talk you through what you're going through, I'll listen. Yeah.
Come get help from Coach Jennifer, please. And thank you. Not even help necessarily, just resonance, just validate.
Yes.
Like come learn how to start validating yourself by speaking with somebody who's done it.
Right. And if you want me to coach you, I'll be happy to do that. And if you don't want me to coach you, I'll be happy to listen and just tell you that it's okay to feel the way you feel. Beautiful.
Jennifer, thank you so much. This has been so powerful. I know that this is going to really touch a lot of people who listen to it. So I just appreciate you.
Sure.
I appreciate our relationship. I appreciate you coming on here to share your story. I'm excited to hear you talk about it more and more. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about how you can help yourself and others release shame, heal from trauma, and create healthier, safer, more mutually beneficial relationships, I want to invite you to head to our website, institutefortrauma.com. At institutefortrauma.com, you'll find free resources, be able to connect to our free online community, and view our courses and trainings, including our foundational trauma-informed, psychologically safe certification, aka the TRIP certification. Head to institutefortrauma.com today to learn more.